In this podcast episode, Omar Baddar, a commentator on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, shares his insights on the complex dynamics of historical grievances, U.S. support for Israel, and the moral implications of military actions in Gaza. He discusses the rise of Hamas, the unsustainable status quo of occupation, and the urgent need for accountability and a reevaluation of U.S. foreign policy to foster a future of equality and shared rights for both Israelis and Palestinians. Baddar emphasizes that the United States has historically provided Israel with nearly unlimited military funding and diplomatic backing. This unwavering support has fostered an environment where Israel feels emboldened to act without fear of repercussions. The lack of accountability for Israel's actions has perpetuated a cycle of violence and oppression, particularly in Gaza, which Baddar describes as an open-air prison. He argues that the moral implications of Israel's actions, especially the intentional destruction of civilian life in Gaza, are unacceptable and warrant serious scrutiny. Baddar advocates for a reevaluation of U.S. foreign policy, urging the U.S. to leverage its influence to encourage Israel to adhere to international law. He posits that a genuine commitment to peace and safety for both Israelis and Palestinians necessitates a shift away from unconditional support for Israel. Instead, he calls for a more balanced approach that recognizes Palestinian rights and addresses the injustices they face. The podcast also delves into the rise of Hamas, which Baddar attributes to the failed peace process and the ongoing occupation. He explains that as Palestinians perceived Israel's lack of genuine interest in ending the occupation, many turned to Hamas as a form of resistance. The peace process, initiated in the 1990s, was undermined by Israel's continued expansion of settlements and the absence of a viable Palestinian state. This disillusionment contributed to Hamas's popularity, as many Palestinians felt they had no other means to achieve their rights and freedoms. Baddar argues that the current status quo of Israeli occupation and Palestinian displacement is both ongoing and unsustainable. He asserts that the denial of freedom and rights to Palestinians creates a breeding ground for violence. The fundamental injustice of the occupation must be addressed for any hope of lasting peace. He emphasizes that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a direct result of Israeli policies that prioritize military objectives over the lives and rights of Palestinians. Baddar critically examines the rhetoric and actions of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, particularly what he describes as genocidal rhetoric aimed at the depopulation of Gaza. He argues that Netanyahu's statements and military actions reflect a broader intention to eliminate the Palestinian presence in the region. This rhetoric is not merely inflammatory. It indicates a systematic approach to undermine the Palestinian population, which Baddar views as a form of genocide. Baddar asserts that Israel's military actions in Gaza are morally unjustifiable. He highlights the disproportionate use of force and the targeting of civilians, arguing that such actions cannot be defended under any moral framework. Various human rights organizations have condemned these actions, labeling them as war crimes. Baddar stresses that the ongoing violence and humanitarian crisis in Gaza are direct consequences of Israeli policies that prioritize military objectives over the rights and lives of Palestinians. The podcast also addresses the pressure exerted on Palestinians and how Israeli desires dominate the discourse surrounding the conflict. Baddar notes that the narrative often centers around Israeli security concerns while sidelining the fundamental rights and needs of the Palestinian people. This imbalance perpetuates the cycle of violence and suffering, as the voices of Palestinians are marginalized in favor of justifying Israeli actions. Baddar emphasizes that the situation in Gaza transcends minor political disagreements. The scale of violence and the humanitarian crisis cannot be reduced to mere political disputes. They represent a profound moral failing on the part of those who support or justify the actions of the Israeli government. Acknowledging the reality of genocide in Gaza is crucial for understanding the depth of the crisis and the urgency of addressing it. Baddar calls for an immediate cessation of violence as a prerequisite for any meaningful reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. He argues that without stopping ongoing military actions and addressing the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people, any attempts at peace will be futile. Genuine reconciliation requires a foundation of justice and equality, which cannot be achieved while violence continues to escalate. Baddar highlights the U.S. tendency to support its allies, particularly Israel, while being skeptical of nations like Iran. This favoritism often leads to a lack of accountability for actions taken by allies, even when those actions may violate international norms or human rights. Baddar argues that this approach creates a double standard in international relations, where the U.S. overlooks injustices committed by its friends while being quick to criticize adversaries. This selective scrutiny contributes to ongoing conflicts and undermines the credibility of the U.S. in promoting a just international order. Baddar emphasizes the importance of focusing on a better future as a means to prevent conflicts. He suggests that a forward-looking perspective, which prioritizes peace and cooperation, can help mitigate tensions between groups. Baddar advocates for a vision where both Israelis and Palestinians can coexist with equal rights and opportunities. Addressing the root causes of conflict rather than merely reacting to violence is essential for achieving lasting peace. A shared commitment to a better future can foster understanding and collaboration, ultimately leading to a more stable region. Baddar discusses the necessity of equality and shared rights for both Palestinians and Israelis. He argues that any resolution to the conflict must include the recognition of equal rights for all individuals, regardless of their ethnic or religious background. Baddar critiques the current tiered system of rights, which he views as inherently unjust. True peace can only be achieved when both groups are treated as equals, with the same rights and responsibilities. This includes political representation, access to resources, and the ability to live without fear of oppression. Baddar believes that a one-state solution, where both peoples share equal rights, is a viable path forward, although he acknowledges the challenges posed by existing societal fears and insecurities. Baddar asserts that Israel must face consequences for its unjust actions towards Palestinians. He argues that the international community, particularly the U.S., has a responsibility to hold Israel accountable for its policies and actions that violate human rights. Without accountability, the cycle of violence and oppression will continue. Baddar calls for a shift in U.S. foreign policy that prioritizes justice and equality over political expediency. Only by confronting these injustices can a genuine path to peace be forged, one that recognizes the dignity and rights of all individuals involved in the conflict.